A famous story, was always my favorite story in camp, with the Rabbi HaKadosh. There was in his little town, wherever he lived in one of the North African towns. So he had a shchita where he gave away meat for all the Talmidei Chachamim in the town, the poor people in town. And they lined up and they would come to him, and every Friday he would give out meat for Shabbos. Ma'aseh shehaya kach haya, that there was some type of a sickness amongst the animals, and in the standard butcher shop in the Pomegranate of that time, or whatever they used to shop in North Morocco, none of the meats were okay. They were all treif, and there was no meat to be gotten in the entire country. And a lot of the rich people who were used to a lot of meat on Shabbos, especially on Shabbos, the covered Shabbos Kodesh, were pretty upset, and they called in all the Schachter, and they called in all the butchers, and the guy said, listen, if you want kosher meat, we don't have any, what should I do? And then someone said that the Rabbi HaKadosh has meat. So he knocked on the shack, or the humble abode of the Rabbi HaKadosh. This is the richest guy in town, who walked in with his long white robe, and his big, those big belts, and those pointy hats with like the pom-pom hanging off the side. And he said he is so-and-so, who happens to own the palace down the road, which is next to the mountain that he owns and the town that he owns. And I heard you have meat for Shabbos. The Rabbi HaKadosh told him he's welcome to join them for Shabbos. He said, no, I need meat for my whole family. So he explained that he's not really in the butcher business. He just gives out meat to poor people. So the man said, well, I will pay you any price. He said, you don't seem to understand. I am not in the butcher business. And if I had extra meat, I would gladly give it to you, but I have no extra meat. Do you understand that? This is for the poor people in town. So this rich guy said that it is inconceivable to suggest that somehow the poor schleppers in this town are going to have meat for Shabbos, and he's going to have to eat coleslaw. It can't be this way. And the Rabbi HaKadosh said, I can't help you. And as they're talking, in walked a man, very poor, very sweet, 19 kids, not a penny to his name, to pick up his regular meat order, lekavod Shabbos. And the Rabbi HaKadosh said, by all means, here, please take it. And this rich man did not take very kindly to that. Quite frankly, he exploded. His face was bulging in rage. His hat was popping up and down. That pom-pom was like flying high like an antenna. And he yelled and screamed, and he said, this, whatever adjective he used, I don't speak Moroccan very well, this, he has meat for Shabbos, and I'm not going to have meat. And Rabbi HaKadosh didn't say anything, and the man walked out. Later, the Rabbi HaKadosh was told that they revealed to him that here was a big Talmid Chacham, and he's a tzaddik, this Yid, not the screamer, the one that took the meat. And you heard his bazayin, you heard the way he was embarrassed, and you didn't say anything. You didn't defend him. You didn't say, how dare you say that about him? So because of that, you have to go into Golus, you have to go into exile an entire year. And the Rabbi HaKadosh said goodbye to his family, and he packed his bags, and he wandered from place to place. And his first Shabbos, he arrived in a certain town. Now, those were the good days that you were able to go into Golus, because, I don't want to chas v'shalom mention YouTube or other things, but you didn't know what they looked like, because you didn't even have Rebbe pictures. So it was easy for Rashi to go into Golus, because while maybe everyone in France knew all the Rashis, they didn't know what Rashi looked like. Because they didn't have, remember that machberes with a picture of Rashi on it, those blue things? You remember those? Right? They didn't, you remember it, right? Oh, okay. They didn't have, pictures of Rashi. So what Rashi looked like. So Rashi was able to go into Golus. Even the Shagas Arya was able to go into Golus because they didn't know what he looked like. So he came to a certain town, the Shagas Arya once, and the rabbi gave a drasha, and the Shagas Arya picked up his hand and he asked the kasha, and the Rav was like stumped. And he came back the next morning and he says, where's the beggar that asked me the kasha? And he got up and he said, liar! That's the Shagas Arya's kasha you asked me. And so he's the Shagas Arya. Well, they wanted to put him, lock him up, as the Rabbanim had a koyach in those days for being Mavaz the Rav, until someone figured out, wait a second, he is the Shagas Arya. In any event, so I heard once from Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky, he said when he first saw his face on a Rebbe picture, one of those cards that have pictures of Gedolim on it. He said, I thought I made it. I said, I felt so good. He said, I was walking and saw a bunch of kids playing cards until I heard one kid say, Tachlif li 5 Galinskis l'chad Rav Shach. He said, you want to switch 5 Galinskis to 1 Rav Shach? I said, you know what? Covet is never worth it. Right? The more covet you get, the more bezyainus you get. Okay, so the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh goes into Galus, and he comes to the first town, and he stays, and on his way, it's Erev Shabbos. And his minhag is to sleep on Erev Shabbos, to rest up on Erev Shabbos. The Sanzerov said that he doesn't understand, it's so important to sleep on Erev Shabbos, why they did not put it into the Aseres HaDibros. I mentioned this once, I think. I told this to someone. He said he has a big family. He said he went to sleep Erev Shabbos on a short Friday. He said if you would have heard the Koiloi Su Brakim coming from the house, you would have known why he meant the Aseres HaDibros, what the connection was. All right, in any event, so the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh goes to sleep. He's en route, and he finds a tree stump, and he sits down, and he goes to sleep. And it's Parshas Bechukotai, as it is this week. And he envisions 42 Perushim, 42 different Pshatim in the words Im Bechukotai Telechu. If you open up a Chumash and you look in the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, you will see it is numbered 42 different Perushim on the words of Im Bechukotai Telechu. Okay, so he continues on to the shul and he asks someone, "Can you please take me in?" The guy says, "Sure, no problem. Please come on in." And he doesn't say who he is. He says, "What's your name?" Yeah, I don't have a name, whatever. And Friday night, he says, the Rav in this town, he has like a tish. We go to the tish, okay? You coming? He says, sure. And he sits down. And the Rav is fearing tish. And apparently this Rav is a very big makubal. In the middle of his tish, he dozes off. And you can tell this is not a simple dozing off. His neshama is flying high. And he says, they just revealed to him in the Mesifta Derakia, in the Heavenly Academy, 14 Perushim on the words in Mechikaisei Telechu, that so who was Mechadish this great tzaddik? I don't know who he is. I never heard of him before. His name is Reb Chaim ben Otter, I think. And he said over the 14 Perushim, and he said, and this comes from the tzaddik Reb Chaim ben Otter. And the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, who is Chaim ben Otter, goes, who? What? Tzaddik? What? Everyone turns around, they're chutzpah. What kind of guest is this? How dare you? Me, Shah, no, Derech Eretz. Everyone joins in on the choir, keeps going, and then when it quiets down, somebody else goes, it's another gesture just to make sure they got the message. And on the way home, so his host says, why'd you do that? He says, I know this Chaim ben Otter, nothing. But you can't. The Rav said he's a tzaddik, they're revealing his Torahs and Shemayim, and you go, huh? How dare you? Right? With a meh, who see you can kill somebody. The apam harguish, they teach. With a twist of your nose, you can kill someone. Who is he? Is there nothing? They say that the Chavetz Chaim, when he was a very young man, said something to Rabbi Sol Salanter about someone, gave an assessment. Rabbi Sol Salanter looked at him and said, with your nose, you can also speak Lashon Hara. It doesn't have to be with your mouth. They say the Chavetz Chaim fainted. That's the story that I heard. But Al Kopanim, in any event, so the next day, after the Shabbos afternoon meal, he says he's going back. The Rebbe has an afternoon tish, and he suggested that perhaps his guest lay down the Kovet Shabbos a little bit and don't come along. He says, no, I'm coming along. What's the problem? The problem is what you did yesterday. Will you behave yourself? No, just stay, quiet. So, middle of the tish, once again, the holy rabbi goes into a trance, and he's Megala, and he reveals another 14 Pshatim in the words Im Bechukotai Telechu. And he says this comes from a great tzaddik, Reb Chaim ben Otter. And once again, the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh goes, yeah, Chaim ben Otter. Now everyone jumps up, they start screaming and yelling, chutzpah, whatever you want. They mamish, throw him out. Comes Shalashu this time, he says, I hope you're leaving right after this mom. Troublemaker here. He says, I want to come with you for Shalashu. Please. Shalashu is not good. It's not good, really. The herring is not for you. Just lay down. We'll bring everything over here. No, I want to come along. And once again, the Rav goes into his trance, and he reveals another 14 Pshatim. And once again, he says from the Tzaddik Chaim ben Otter, and he goes again, blah! And this time the Rav says, enough. I just told you he's a hidden tzaddik. I just told you they revealed his total of 42 Pshatim. In Mechikaisei Telechu, this is the third time in a row, we can't look away at this anymore. And they took him, as was the custom in those days, and they imprisoned him. In every shul in those days, not only had a mikveh and a place where you sold snacks, it also held a local jail. and which greatly enforced the Rav's power of getting you to be quiet, or other things, or paying your yisker dues, or whatever it is. I guess it was. So the Maisa, they put the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh into prison. And all of a sudden there's this, as the story goes, this horrific storm, and it looks like a tornado and a hurricane and an avalanche and a tsunami in one shot. It looks like the whole Beis Medrash is going to fly up and be destroyed, and everyone starts crying and screaming, and the Rav makes a quick elevator up there to find out what's this all about. And they tell him that what happens is like this, that apparently there's an Indian that the Neshamais go out of Gehenna for Shabbos, and they can't go back in on Mitzvah Shabbos till certain things have to happen. Which is one of the reasons that the minig is, in many places, when you daven Ma'ariv, Matzah Shabbos, you don't just say Behu Rachum, you go Behu Rachum, right? You stretch it out, because you want to stretch it out as much as possible. Are you going to say, what's the big difference between Behu and Behu? I don't know how hot Gehenna is, so he makes a very big difference. Of course, it depends which Gehenna the person is. They say, I think I mentioned this just before, the guy goes up there, they say, which Gehenna do you want, the Chassidish Gehenna or the Litvish Gehenna? He goes, well, how hot is the Chassidish Gehenna? They say it's 300 degrees, and when does it start? He says it starts, an hour before the Zman, ends by the Zman. What's the Litvish Gehenna? Pretty much the same thing. He says, I'll pick the Chassidish Gehenna. He says, why? He says, because 300 degrees is not 300 degrees, and it doesn't start on time. He says, at least I'll have some kind of a break, So, Al Kopanim, so they tell him that until the Tzaddik Hadar makes Havdalah, the Neshamas can't go back to Gehenna. And because the Tzaddik Hadar cannot make Havdalah, so there's this major fight going up there, and that is manifesting itself in these horrific, threatening storms down here in this world. So he says, why can't the Tzaddik Hadar make Havdalah? So they told him, because he's in jail in your shul. So then he figured out this was Reb Chaim Ben Otta, that he was making fun of himself, so he called him up. And he told him that they also revealed to him that even though you were only one Shabbos in Golis, but the bizyonis that you went through or created for yourself is equal to an entire year in Golis, and you have a tikkun and you can go home. Now, mind you, the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh is on Har HaZeisim, and it is there's one more, but out of all the tombstones that were destroyed by the Arabs between 1948 and 1967, the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh remains intact. This is something you can go and see. It was not rebuilt. It is the original tombstone. There are all sorts of legends about what happened when they tried to destroy it, including the bulldozer turning over and the handle of the axe flying over and across, and they just scared off on the sides, better not chep over here. So, and we all know the famous story, I'm not going to get into it now, that when General Rommel was a stone throw away from Eretz Yisrael, and the Mufti of Jerusalem was going around getting lists of Jews, because he said any second, that's it, the Germans are here, and there was no one there to stop him, and there was a tremendous pachad. So the Siyatan, I think today was his yahrzeit, yesterday was his yahrzeit, they davened by the tzion of the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, and he turned around and he told them Rommel is not coming in. And they asked him, how do you know? He said on top of the tzion of the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, he saw the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei. And you know the rest of the story, that Rommel did not come in, and they won that battle, and Churchill said that until that battle at Tobruk, they never won a battle against the Germans. Afterwards, they never lost a battle against the Germans. That was a turning point in the war. Now, when I used to say this story in camp, so the kids were very fascinated with it. And sometimes, even the ones that hesitated with those kind of stories, I don't know, secrets and flying and Shemayim, but I used to ask kids, why are you so fascinated with this story? And I got essentially 5 different answers. One answer was they were impressed with the fact, not so much with all the Gehennas and everything else, but they were impressed with the fact that he had the courage to stand up to the rich person. So you'd be surprised what kids are, you'd think that's the last thing they would be impressed with. What do you mean? He was the richest guy in town, and he said, no, the meat is for the poor people. The other kids were impressed with the fact that they realized you have to go through a certain amount of tzaris in your life, and Rahman al-Islam, and sometimes the tzaris get so magnified, you think, but that means that you get through with it quicker. The guy said, right, that has anniversary, and he says, I want to speak l'kavod my 75th anniversary. So she corrects him, you're only married 35 years. He says, Kishi Hashibud, like it says by Mitzrayim, had to get 400 years. They worked so hard, the 210 years. He said, this counts. Okay. All right, the guy said he wanted to retire until he saw the list that his wife had for him, and he decided he's better off working. Some of the kids felt that they saw in this story that Hashem doesn't hate us, He directs us. And they took into account that here, he was Meiser Nefesh himself to give the food to the poor person, stands up to the rich person, and instead of getting rewarded, pays a price for the fact that he didn't defend the honor of the Talmud Chacham, and he's makabelit. They were quite impressed with that. So we explained the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is medagdik b'tzadikim kechut asara. For the righteous, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very, very careful. You know, there's one IQ test that you take if you are applying for a job to drive the Staten Island ferry. There's another one if you're flying an F-16 fighter. You obviously have to be much more astute. You have to be much more clear. You can't say, did I press that button to drop the missile or not? You know, you can't have that. So with tzaddikim, the Eibush is medagdik on every little thing because they are perfect. Hashem directs you. I'll never forget, when I was first in Koil, there was this guy that ran the Koil. He was the balabas of the Koil. He paid for the Koil. And when he came in, everyone started to learn. He generated a tremendous amount of hasmada. I have a friend, he is a tremendous shatchan. He's like one of the best. And the Rosh Hashiva in Lakewood, one of the Rosh Hashivas asked him to come more often because when he comes into the Beis Medrash, he also generates a tremendous amount of hasmada. Not suggesting that there's no hasmada under normal circumstances, but it looked like it's an added incentive. In any event, so this guy was like, when he walked into the kollel, he was like, he would walk around and he would say, what's this? Why are you learning? Why are you sleeping? Why are you this? Why are you that? You know, it was everything was like, you know. We were all a little scared of him. Anyway, so, I told you this one. The guy used to come in, he would check in and put his hat down and run. I told you, hit and run, right? In Yiddish, a hat is a hit. All right, scratch that one from the record. Al Kapanim, so I remember he married off his daughter, and there was a Vart. So we all came to the Vart, because he's the Rosh HaKoil, right? And he's sitting there, and he sits down, and there was this big cream cake, okay? And he's giving everyone mazel tov, and he's like leaning over, you know, he's dressed in this nice suit, big shining cufflinks, his roll, whatever, the watch he has there. And as he leans over, he inadvertently got a tremendous amount of cream on his nose. And as he walks back and he's smiling, and here he is, the guy we're all scared of, is sitting there with like this big thing of cream, like a Purim nose, like dripping, and no one goes over to this guy, you know, who controls your kollel check and everything, and says, you have cream on your nose, like we're looking at each other, and like, right, nose, and all of a sudden we hear from the other side of the mechitza, okay, whatever the guy's name was, Maisha! Get over here, right? And he's like, what do you want? He's screaming, you get over right now. And they gesture back and forth. He walks over to the mechitza, like, what are you screaming at me across everywhere? And I don't know what she said to him, but I assumed that when he turned around, he had a handkerchief and he was wiping his nose. I assume that she noticed it. So I later on, I just think back to that story, and I told my kids, you see, we were all going to have derech eretz for him, right? We weren't going to tell him that there was cream on his nose because we really couldn't care less. And then he was a laughing stock. He was going to be a laughing stock of all the pictures that are coming. However, his wife really cared for him. So he may have been very annoyed at his wife when she had to scream across the mechitza. But Lamaisa, at the end, she was the one that really cared, that he was being embarrassed. I said, you may try to do something right, and it's not going your way. And you're saying, what does the Rebbeinu Shalom want from me? And the answer is because the Rebbeinu Shalom cares for you. And because he cares for you, therefore he's constantly looking to correct you. Now one kid, I remember when I said over this story, and I said, so what did you feel in this story? The kid said a very interesting thing. He said, I see that when you're Shomer Shabbos down here, it really affects who you are, your parents and your grandparents. And I didn't see clearly how he saw it in the story. He said, because, you know, Gehenna and Gan Eden until he made Avdallah. So it really means I got to be careful with Shabbos because it affects my grandfather. And I found out later that he was a kid that came from a foreign country and that his parents were not from, and there was a grandfather and a grandmother that was, and clearly that made a tremendous impact on him. I once had a young lady over by our house for Shabbos. She was Shomer Shabbos. She told us a fascinating story how she became from. She was here, I think she started with NCSY or something like that, and she came back and her mother was a die-hard communist. I mean, she was really, and her grandfather was even more red than that. She said once her grandfather was buried in a red suit and a red bow tie in, I don't know, in Stalingrad or someplace, or right there in Lenin Square or something. But her grandmother, Nebuch, you know, was still a Hamish lady, and she saw what was happening, that life was being wiped out by the communists. And when his mother got married, she came and she brought, she gave a present to her daughter, two Schachter, two candlesticks. This was hers, and she was giving it over to her daughter. And her daughter, under the chuppah, I don't know if they had a chuppah, but she picked it up and threw it at her grandmother. Literally threw it at her and said, I don't need these. And her grandmother said, then I'll continue lighting with them. And Lamaisa, before the grandmother died, she once again asked the daughter to take it. And the daughter was moving to America, or maybe I'm off by a generation, but they're moving to America, so she took along the candlesticks. And now that this kid, okay, this little girl goes to a program and she's starting to learn about Yiddishkeit and she wants to sin lech Friday. And she tells her mother she wants to sin lech, and her mother says, absolutely not. So she gets these two little tea lights and she starts lighting it in her room, and the mother comes in and she's like really upset. She says, Mom, I'm going to do it anyway. So she says, if you do it, at least do it safely. And she opens up the closet and takes out these two brass candlesticks and throws it on the table. And she remembers hearing the story about the brass candlesticks. And she takes it the next Friday, she's about to light it. And as she is like, she wants to melt the candles in, so you take like the fire and you put it underneath the candle and it drips a little bit and then you put it in, and she saw there was already some wax inside, which she started melting and then melted her candle into this wax. And as she did it, it suddenly hit her. And it hit her in an unbelievable way. She said, wait a second. This is the last time, obviously, that my great-grandmother sinned lech. And now I'm taking my candles and melting it into her wax. So this woman in Russia, maybe 1900s, I don't know when. I don't know, 70, 80 years elapsed since the story. And communism wipes out religion. Nothing is left. People go to sleep saying, thank God I'm an atheist. That's it, gone. I don't believe in Hashem. And she cries, right, that last Friday night of her life, or the last Friday night she was able to sin lech, she cries and says, I hope to have children somehow that still remember there's a Rabbi Shem on the world. And these candlesticks, for 70 years probably, stood there. But wax doesn't evaporate. And that last tefillah, after lying dormant for decades and decades and decades, gets a bracha from an Einakol who has a hamshacha connection of doiros. Just comes to tell us how powerful tefillah is. So this kid felt in this story that somehow what we do down here affects our parents up there, especially on Shabbos. Now it does say that if you're mechadish chidushay Torah on Shabbos, that is a tremendous honor for your father, mother, grandfather, great-grandfather in Shemayim, particularly on Shabbos, where there's more of a connection to them. Now, Reb Chaim Brim, we spoke about him earlier, was a big tzaddik and Erlich Yid. They found in his writings a bunch of notebooks, and he kept writing Matzah Shabbos right after the Zman. It said on the cover of the notebook. And they realized that these were the Chidushei Torah that he thought about on Shabbos as Kibbut Av V'Eim, and wrote them down quickly on Mitzvah Shabbos. Now, so you may listen to this and say, I'm not the type to be Mechadish Chidushim, so how do I affect my father or grandfather or great-grandfather in Shemayim? Mechadish Chidushim doesn't mean you have to be a K'tzais. It means you take out a Chumash and take out a Gemara and think. And as soon as you start thinking, you're connecting in Shemayim. Now, so you got to do that. If you're going to overdose on the Kugel Friday night and overdose on the Shalom Shabbos afternoon, and you roll from one bed to the other, you're not going to be Mechadish any Chidushim, as you know that. I mean, the Sanzarov was very makbid on the eatings, Shalom on Shabbos. And he used to get very sick on Sunday. And once the doctor came to him and examined him, and the doctor said to him, what did you eat, Rabbiner? So he said, Cholent and Pacha and Kugel and Lakshan Kugel. And this. He said, you can't eat those foods. Okay. And we said, you're going to listen to the doctor? He says, this doctor wants me to have a Fashterta Shabbos, a disturbed Shabbos, so I can have a good Sunday. He says, I don't mind having a good Shabbos and a Fashterta Sunday. But the Sanzarov still slept only 2 hours a night with the Cholent. But for most of us, when you overdose on the Cholent, there's no 2 hours of sleeping. You get rolled into your bed and you have the most interesting dreams afterwards, I find. But Al Kolpanim, so there is an inyan of learning on Shabbos, and that has an effect to our parents or grandparents. Really, and I will tell you the truth, that I try, I can't tell you I do it all the time, but people ask me, you come to your Shabbos Suda and everything is just perfect, right? Hunky-dory, yeah, great, sure, right. Just don't come and look. But I really try, and I prepare for each Suda. I really figure out who the guests are and which kids are there, and I try to find the right story. You have to prepare for a Shabbos Suda. That's chidushim. You're mechadish what to say to whom. It's interesting that the Yisad v'sharish who Avodah brings that whenever he said l'shem yichud prior to a mitzvah, so if he would say l'shem yichud hineni muchanim mezuman, I'm getting ready to mekayim the mitzvah of Sfiras ha'omer, he would always add Sfiras ha'omer and kibbut avein. Or if he would say hineni muchanim mezuman to eat matzah, he would say matzah and kibbut avein, because every mitzvah that you do has an effect on people that are up there. As a matter of fact, kabbalas avicha v'simecha is right before Zachar Shem Shabbos l'katshai, as many understand that as you enhance your Shabbos, there's a tremendous kavod for your parents up there in Shemayim. There was a Rosh Koil in Eretz Yisrael in Schachter, the Schachter Koil. His name was Rav Shmuel Tzvi Kalavetsky, I think. I don't remember his last name. And he was a very, very special person. And his parents lived both to very ripe old age, and he was Moshe Nefesh himself for them. And Maisa Shahoya by him was that he once came home by lunch as a bacher to visit his mother, and he came very far from yeshiva, and his mother found a new recipe for some type of a soup with some type of a vegetable. He says he doesn't know what it was, but that soup was like green, like mold green, and it had an odor that almost knocked you flat on the ground, out cold. And his mother said, I cooked it for you. And he said, He said he took one spoonful, he thought he was going to choke. And his mother said, are you okay? Yeah, I'm just so emotionally overwhelmed by this gewaldige green mush, that soup, And he polished it off till the end. And he said, Ma, it was the most delicious soup. It was the most interesting, I wanted to lie. It was the most interesting soup. I'm going to remember this for many hours, he said, running out, holding out. So his mother was so excited that he complimented the soup that every time he came, she kept making the soup. And he, of course his hope was one day he's going to get married. Well, it turned out that right before he got married, so his mother met with the new kala, the new bride, and the new bride said, tell me, what is my future husband like? So the mother said, I'll give you the recipe. Right? And he comes home the first day after Sheva Brachas. His wife is making the first supper, and she goes, look what I made for you. And he goes, oh, how nice, how nostalgic. And he realizes he's stuck now the rest of his life. You see, there's no way he can tell his wife, because his mother's going to find out, so he's sitting there, and he basically eats this soup. Every single, I don't know how often his wife made it for him. Whenever he was really good, he got a treat. And many, many decades later, he passed away. And a man came to be Menachem Oval, and he told the wife, he said, your husband saved my marriage. And she said, how? She said, when I got married, I was acting very I was a spoiled pichech. And I would come home and tell my wife, there's not enough salt, and not enough this, and not enough that, and she'd get out of the kitchen, you get out of the kitchen, it's my kitchen, it's this, it's Jens. And Shabbos, the Shabbos food was just never right. And we got into a terrible fight about this, and to the point where it was going to wreck my marriage, because I have to have everything my way. And I wrote a letter to your husband. I said, what do I do with my wife? She won't cook the food the way I want it. He said, are you out of your mind? You're going to destroy your marriage because of that? And he told me this story about the green soup. And his wife hears this. She goes, oh no, that's 50 years I made that soup for him. Why did he do it? Why did he do it? I'll tell you one thing. If it would have been the best soup in the world, it would have been over as soon as it went down his esophagus. But that green soup lasted forever. So I once said this story to someone, and the guy was not impressed. He said, so you're mechuyev to eat rotten soup your whole life? I said, you're mechuyev to think differently, okay? You go up one rung on the ladder. And along the same lines, there's this letter from the Chazon Ish. And he writes over here as follows. He says, the sweetness of Torah is so great, and you can't really feel the sweetness of Torah, says the Chazon Ish, unless you learn 3-4 hours straight, without a hefsek. Without that, he says, you can't imagine the ruchnius in the Torah. And Kal v'chomer, after 5 hours of learning, the madrega you're on. And if you stop then, it's like taking the pot off the fire prematurely. But if you learn 6 hours straight, you forget the entire world, and you're totally connected to Ruchnius. And if you learn 7 hours straight, you have mamish nira kadosh baruch hu, you have mamish have no enough from this world, you're so full of simcha. And if you learn 8 hours straight, he says, even your mamish, no taiva could affect you. Then after 9 hours straight, you're kulei kadosh l'mayla. And v'achar eser shas, you learn 10 hours straight, ayin l'ra'asa. No eye even ever saw the sweetness you could feel. So I'm saying this to this kid in my class, from several years ago. Because now all the kids in the class, they're all big masmidim. But from several years ago, he's got to cover your tracks here. But he says, I can't sit more than 10 minutes. What's this, 6 hours, 7 hours, 10 hours? So I said, I'm going to tell you something. You think the Chazon Ish didn't realize most people cannot sit 10 hours straight and learn? Okay? What he's saying is, if you could sit 10 minutes, sit 11 minutes. If you could sit 11 minutes, sit 12 minutes. Go up one rung on the ladder. You don't have to eat rotten soup your whole life. You're allowed to say you don't like something. But at least put food into perspective. There's something more important than the food. Right? They once saw this guy that was saying, remember he worked in camp, he was saying, life is so good, he was saying. One of the custodians, he was saying, this guy was so lazy you can't imagine. He would say, eating makes me so sleepy. He says, sleeping makes me so hungry. He says, that was his life. He was fired after 4 weeks, but he had a good 4 weeks over there. Like, before Shavuos, we got to look a little higher. We got to get out of this, go up a little bit more, and we have to realize we have an achrayus. And our achrayus is that we all stood by Matan Torah and we're headed for Mashiach. And in between, there are corrections that have to be made. And that's who you are, and that's who I am. And we have to do it. And we have to do it. So just be happy about night of Shavuos, only 4 hours here, because if you happen to be in Australia, Shavuos, then you should know that they have the Zman at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because it's winter then, Shavuos time, and the Netzach Chama is not till 8 o'clock in the morning. So don't complain about your 4 hours over here that you spend every 5 minutes going out for another coffee and for some more watermelon. Just imagine if you were in Australia. It's interesting. Someone actually called me up and said that he heard a tape. He said, and I said that on the tape I said, I don't know if this is true, someone told me. I usually say things first and then find out if it's true. Anyway, but he said when a plane takes off, it's under the jurisdiction of the point of destination, the arrival control tower. Because until you take off, you have to take orders from the departing control tower. As soon as you're in the air, you take control from the control tower that you're headed to. So I said that even if you're headed to Australia and you're traveling across the world, once you leave, you're up in the air, they're the ones that give you orders. So this guy called me, and he said he lives in Melbourne. He never heard the CD before. And he was like a little, by where's his life going? And he hears this. It says, even if you're in Australia. So he wanted to know if I had Ruach HaKodesh. So I told him, could be, No, honestly, I told him absolutely not. It's just guarantee you, no. But we all hear what we have to hear. The point of Shavuos is not where we are. It's where you're going. It's where you're going. Just to have a little bit of, it's a little bit more. The Yisad V'Shar Shavayda brings an interesting thing. We all know Shabbos, we have an Neshama Yisayvasa, correct? You have an extra Neshama. What does that mean, an extra Neshama? So he says, it means whatever you did during the week, that aspect of your Yiras Shamayim is enhanced on Shabbos. If during the week, he brings us some Azayah, you increased your love to Hashem, so you have more Ahava on Shabbos. If during the week you had a sense of Yira, fear to Chait, then you have more Yira on Shabbos. If during the week you were Meitzah yourself for Hasmadas HaTorah, you have more Hasmad on Shabbos. Whatever you did during the week is enhanced on Shabbos. So now, Zakti Archaim HaKadosh, I told you there are 42 pshatim in Bechukotai Teleichu. I figure it would take us 10 minutes to go through each. So, and the Chazon Ish did say about learning 10 hours straight, so we're going to start now the 42 pshatim. No, I am just joking. We're going to go through only 2 of them, okay? Number 17 and the last one. The rest you all have for homework, and I want to have it in by tomorrow morning. I will give you my email address, which I don't have. All right. The Archaim HaKadosh says like this. In Bechukotai Teleichu is Lashon Asid. You try. Don't say, what's the Chazon Ish talking about? 10 hours? What 10 hours? I don't have 10 hours. You try. You do what you have to do. And as soon as you say, Rabbi Shalom, I want to be better. I don't want to spend my life eating to be able to sleep and sleeping to be able to eat. As soon as that happens, automatically that's mitzvosai tishmoru. They say that it's a school for Shalom Bayis if you put the candles on by Chatzos, and this table is set for Shabbos. So a guy tells me, the table is set for Shabbos at Chatzos. As soon as the kids come home, the table gets unset. As they're chasing each other around the dining room table. He lives on the 10th floor of an apartment house. I said, it's still a school for Shalom Bayis. Because the Rebbeinu Shem wants us to try. You try. The interesting, the Yisad V'Shar Shavayda also brings that from the Zohar, that there's thousands, myriads of malachim that go from Shabbos table to Shabbos table. and they look to see if you're doing your best. If you do your best, they give you a bracha that your tefillah should be answered. If you're not doing your best appropriately by the Shabbos table, I don't want to tell you what they say. You can look it up in the Yisad V'Shar Shel. It says a person who's makabel and oirach on Shabbos, that's a tremendous madrega. But the Zohar says, you know what the oirach is? The oirach is your extra neshama. The oirach is the extra koiches that you get if you have a feeling that you just want to be better. Now let's go. He also says, let me just throw this in. These brings some desire. They said b'sharish who avoid it. In yeshle katata, if there's any disagreement in your house, which sometimes happens erev Shabbos before this man, nerves get a little, shall we say, fuses get a little short and a little thinned out. He says it's extremely important, whether it's your wife or anyone else, that you have any hard feelings. Two, if you straighten it out before Shabbos, Shabbos really appreciates that, and you get a tremendous amount of bracha. And if you don't have any hard feelings with anyone before Shabbos, then add extra friendship. The im islay shalema b'chol shis yaimin throughout the 6 days. Then go over to your wife and give an extra compliment. Add something more. And if you do that, then Shabbos is considered kol haTorah. Now we're going to skip now to number 42, the 42nd shot in the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, and you could look it up. And there he says as follows. And in order to understand what he says, let's review real quickly the story that the Gemara tells us in the Sechtes Rosh Bava Metzia. Gemara says that Rabbi went and he sewed flax, and he weaved nets, and he trapped deers, and he fed the orphans with the meat, and he wrote Sifrei Torah, and then he traveled around from country to country, to little village, and he took 5 kids together, took one Bereshis, the other Shemais, the other Vayikra, the other Bamidbar, the other Devarim, and he did that without all of the fancy learning skills that there are. He just taught them, and more than that, he taught them how to teach each other. And then he did it with the Shishi Sidrei Mishnah. He took 6 kids. He said, I'm going to teach you Zroim, I'm going to teach you Mayid, Nashim, so on and so on. He taught them how to teach each other. He went from town to town, and the Gemara says, if not for Reb Chia, the Torah would have been forgotten from Klal Yisrael. Well, you may think Reb Chia couldn't have gotten a different job, right? So he's had no job. He had to be a first-grade Rebbe. It says in Ksubis, Reb Chia was next in line to be the Nasi of Klal Yisrael. The Nasi. The leader that was doimet to a melech, to a king. He said, it's more important for me to go around and teach little kids. Okay? So the Gemara says a story. One of the Amiroim, Rav Chaviva Bar Sumki, once saw somebody else whose eyes were very red. He said, why are your eyes so red? So he said, I meet Eliyahu Navi. Yeah, okay. And what about him? And he said, I asked him, show me what's doing up there. He said, I'll show you all the tzaddikim, but you can't look at Reb Chia. You can't look at him in Shemayim. He said, well, how do I know it's him not to look at him? He says, if you see a throne flying alone, without any malachim holding it, that's Reb Chia. So I went up there and I couldn't hold myself back. I looked, and he says he lost his sight. And the next day I went to Reb Chia's mitzvah, and I started to cry. I learned your Torah, and I got back my eyesight. So right afterwards, the Gemara tells us the whole story. Rabbi was guys. We'll just stop over there, okay? Kumt Rav, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, he teaches like this. In Bechukotai, if you accept on yourself your role on this world, whatever it is, even though there's conflict in your life, even though there's difficulty, and you say, whatever I do just doesn't work. In Bechukotai, if you just try, and you say, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to continue trying, you can be Zoicha to Teilechu, that your throne should also fly up without the Malachim, just like Reb Chia's did. That's what the pasuk is saying. Now, why is the Orach Chaim HaKadosh telling this? Reb Chia's throne went flying up. I mean, that's obviously the Madrega of the Gadol Adar. Relatively speaking, apparently it's Negeya to us also. Gemara says, we mentioned this very many times, Gemara Bava Metzia says that Eliyahu Navi used to come to learn by Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and one day Eliyahu did not show up. And Rabbeinu HaKadosh said to him, where were you? That's a pretty big Madrega. I mean, even those of us that have this Galus Eliyahu, we don't talk to Eliyahu that way, right? But Rabbeinu HaKadosh, where were you? He said, well, I was very busy. I had to wake up Avraham Avinu, put him to sleep. Had to wake up Yitzchak, put him to sleep. Had to wake up Yaakov and put him to sleep. And by the time, the time they were finished davening, I couldn't come to Shir. So Rabbeinu HaKadosh said, why couldn't you wake them all up together? He said, then Mashiach would have come. So he got the message. He said, who on this world could generate that power of mercy? He said, Reb Chia and his 2 sons. So they called Reb Chia and his 2 sons, and the Rebbe was Geyser Tainus, and they started davening. When they said Masha V'ruach, boy, the wind started to blow. They said Meir Geshem, there was a thunderstorm, and then they started to say Mechaya Mesim, the world began to shake, and there was a whole tumult in Shemayim. Whoa, we're not ready for Tchiyas Mesim yet, hold on. So suddenly, there was a tremendous, Eliyahu was sent down to this world. He had to stop them because he revealed the secret. And the Gemara says he walked into shul where they were davening, or in the town square, and he appeared in the image of a burning bear. Now, I would imagine that if this door opened up and a burning bear, 6-foot grizzly, walked in on fire, some of you may be distracted a little bit. They were distracted at that moment. I mean, a bumblebee in my class sends everyone flying, right? But they walked. They were distracted, and Mashiach didn't come. So the Ben Yehuda says, "Why a burning bear?" He says, "A bear exposes the heart. When he attacks his victim, he rips him up until the heart, and he exposed their heart. They weren't really ready for Mashiach yet. They weren't really ready to be on the level of Rabbi Chia. Just tell me what I have to do. I don't need to be nasi. I don't need to sit on the dais. I don't need the covet. I don't need exposure. Tell me, Rabbi Shalom, what I have to do." You know, Rameir of Pramishlan said, if you look into a Yid's tefillos, you look into his davening, if you really look deep in, even the guy that's davening with all of his heart, if you look very, very deep, you know what you're going to find he's really asking for? Money. But if you look real deep into the money, what are you going to find? Why does he want the money? To pay schar limud. He wants the money to marry off his kids. So it really is the Rabbeinu Shalom. So I guess if you look deep enough, you'll find it. But they weren't deep enough yet at that moment. Now, think about this along these lines. So you would think, well, Reb Chia is the nephew of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, I think, you know, and he's so great, he doesn't have to be the Nasi to get identity, to build up his self-esteem. You know what the Gemara says about Nivamis, about Reb Chia? Reb Chia, whatever he did for his wife always gave him a hard time. If he asked for beans, his wife gave him chalt. If he asked for chalt, his wife gave him beans. Until once he asked for, barsht, and the barsht came. So what happened to his wife? He got what he asked for, so his son said, I told you one orange juice or something, right? So he said, no, I don't want you to lie to her. No lie. No lie. And whenever Reb Chia found something, he always sent it as a present to his wife. And the Rav once came, he said, what are you doing? You keep rewarding her, and she is driving you, she's like, shows no respect to you whatsoever. And he said, I look at the good things. She's raising my children. She saves me from chait. Now wait a second. Now I would think if I was Reb Chia, I would say, I need this for my shalom bayis. I have to show her that I am a man. I'm a nasi. No, not Reb Chia. Reb Chia says, I'll do what I have to do. I'll deal with my nesiyonus. I will deal with my difficulties. And Reb Chia is the one that flies on his own. You see, the Arizal says Reb Chia was the neshama of Yishai, father of David. If we can do this, so what's the Yoreh Chaim HaKadosh saying? Im Bechukotai. What does a chak mean? Chak means things happen that we don't understand. Why are things happening to me in my life that I don't understand? I'm trying to be good. I gave away the meat to the poor person. I get punished. What am I doing? Why can't I get my life together? It's not just a chak, which means a mitzvah that we don't understand. It's chukotai. It's if God is formulating my tzaras. And the answer is, yeah. Because this is your tafkid on this world, and if you hold on long enough, says the Yoreh Chaim HaKadosh, Im Bechukotai, if you believe Hashem formulated this for me, it's my tikkun, you know what's going to happen? For one split second to the next, Telechu. You're going to realize your tzaras are over, and at one point, Hashem is going to carry you. It says if a bunch of people would sit down with their pekel, everybody would take back their own pekel. You know, here's my problem, okay, everybody would take back their own. You have to hang in there. If you hang in there, it gets to a point of Telechu. Today is the yahrzeit of Rav Binyamin Mendelssohn. I'm not going to get into the story at length, but he was the one that moved down to Kananiyos, down south in Eretz Yisrael, and he was the first Shomer Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael after the war. And he was told by the agriculture department of that time that you're mad, that we're all starving for hunger. There was not enough food in Eretz Yisrael. And they had miracle after miracle after miracle, nes after nes. There's the famous story of the Haysherik and the grasshoppers, the locusts that came in and ate up everything around and around. They did not touch Kananiyos. And like in Mitzrayim, they even defined the border of Kananiyos. Many years ago, long time ago, someone hired a driver to take me to Lakewood for a speech. Never made it to the speech. This guy was an interesting character. No one told him he was supposed to go south on the Garden State instead of north. It was really like Gishmak. I still remember we had those, used to throw the money into the basket in those days before Easy Pass, and he threw a bunch of coins. Everyone missed. And they got out and picked it up, and then I don't know where we wound up stopped in the middle of the highway, and he came out and he took a map, and he was, and a state trooper stopped him, and like, what are you doing? He goes, how do I find, where did I find this? Like, just head there, just go. He goes, good thing he didn't ask me for my license. I said, why not? He says, I don't have any. Anyway. He says, yeah, it's an Israeli license. I don't know if I got Tfil Sederich with his picture on or something. Okay. So, Yankel Miller, he always said the word that he had, the cop stopped him. He says, he always had a Tfil Sederich with his picture on it. He says, this is an Israeli license. The cop looks at it, he goes, I want to know, am I the Chayis Royas or the Listim Royim? Which one am I on this over here? Anyway, so we missed the speech. We got there was nobody there. And on the way back, I said, there had to be a reason Hashem did this to me. I said, where are you from? He says he's from Kainanias. I said, you're from Kainanias? You got to tell me the story. Is it true that the locust didn't? He says, I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. Now, I believe he was there, because even if he wanted to drive away, he wouldn't know how. Okay? So I know he was there. Now, he really said, no, he was an Eid Echad. He said, and I got to tell you an interesting aspect to the story. He said, the locust didn't come into Kainanias in a Shemitah year. There was one field that they crossed over, but they didn't do anything to that field. He said, no one knows this, but I went to ask the guy, what did you cheat on? So he said, in the middle of the night, he opened up the sprinklers on his field. You weren't supposed to do that according to the laws of Shemitah. He said, I knew you did something, that he said. So anyway, there was just Nes after Nes, the entire time period. And the emunah that people had. So I was once doing an interview of these old farmers from Kainanias, or neighboring areas. And many of them went to war and all came back from these little villages that held Shemitah. It's just amazing stories. What it means that there's Mesiras Nefesh. Shemitah, they were told by the economists of the time, is an impossibility. It makes economically no sense. It is a disaster. You know something? When a Yid says, Bechukotai, this is my chak. Yeah, I have to deal with a situation that is impossible. And I'm going to do it. Rabbi Hashem, if you carved it out for me, and I believe you did it for me. So Teilechu. Hashem says, good, I'll carry you. I'll carry you the rest. So there's one farmer I interviewed, and I asked him, so you do a Shomer Shemitah? Yeah, I was Shomer Shemitah. That's so nice. And what happened afterwards? Oh, your grapes grew in, right? Those big miracles? No miracles. What happened? I lost my farm. You lost your farm? Yeah, couldn't pay the mortgage. And then what happened? Then I lost my farm. And then what happened? Then I had no panos. What do you mean what happened? Okay, end of interview. Then he calls me in. He says, Boychik, he says, I want to tell you I was married 13 years with no children. Okay? So I'm not even Shomer Shabbos. I don't know why I listened to these people and I was Shomer Shemitah. He says, after that year, I lost my farm, I lost everything. My wife became pregnant. He tells me it's not good to tell God what to do, how to pay you back. Okay? So don't try to say, the payers work, the fruits work. You leave it to Hashem. The whole parsha of Behar Bechukotai is a parsha of Bechukotai Telechu. Shemitah Yovel. It's my life is Bechukotai. I don't understand it. You have the courage to keep on going, and you will see Telechu, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu will carry you over the rest.